Tug of War. Sergeant Warrington wasn't pleased. Since the accident with the conker tree, the other engines had been teasing him non-stop. Navis and Knapford tried to get the others to stop, but they wouldn't listen. One day, the fat controller announced our whale tour was coming to Sodor, and the engine would be staying for a couple of days. The next morning, Gordon, James and Henry was waiting at Knapford for the visiting engine. "I hope it's an LNR engine like me," said Gordon. "I hear he's a big, strong tender engine," added Henry. "What, bigger than you?" asked James. But before Henry could reply, the signal dropped and they heard a loud booming whistle. "That must be him," said Henry. The engines were surprised when a large navy blue tender engine came round the bend. It had a long boiler, a big tender and 8 driving wheels. His design looked American. The 3 big engines didn't know what to say. That night the visiting engine stayed at Tidmouth Sheds. "Howdy, friends. The name's Hank." The big engine seemed very friendly. The Sodor engines quickly introduced themselves. "If I may ask, are you from America?" asked Gordon. "Why, yes," replied Hank. "I was built in 1914 and shipped across the pond to help with the war effort." "Not another war engine," James said to himself. Just then, Sergeant Warrington backed into the sheds. "At ease, men. Another day's duty done." "Private Hank! Sergeant Warrington! Who made you leave the army?" "I think they know each other," said Bear. "Know each other? Me and the sergeant here were stationed at the same dock in 1942. This tank engine made our troublesome trucks look like loyal forces dogs. But your strength made pulling those supply trains look like a walk in the park. What are you doing these days?" "I've retired from the army. I'm a preserved engine on a heritage railway in jolly old England land. I'm doing this whale tour for a few weeks. What about you? I thought you'd never leave the army." "We all have to retire at some point," replied the sergeant. "But this island is perfect for me to work." "Work and play with conkers," joked Gordon, and James and Henry joined in. "You should have more respect for him," Hank said crossly. "The sergeant here saved my life and many more. If you're referring to that night, I was just doing my job." "Above and beyond your job," commented Hank. "I'll tell you the story if you like." And the big engine did. During the war, Warrington was assigned to shunting in an army dockyard on the southwest coast of England. Back in those days, he held the rank of corporal and was in charge of the incoming goods trucks. 2 tender engines were assigned to transport the war supplies, Hank and a Q1 locomotive called Neville. They both had great respect towards Warrington. One day, Corporal Warrington had just finished shunting their trains, while the 2 tender engines watched. "Attention, Private Hank, Private Neville. You have your orders. These are the empty trucks ready to be filled with the front line supplies." "No problem," replied Neville. "We'll have the supplies here before you can say, 'Attention! Attention!'" "Oh no, here he comes again," sighed Hank. The American Navy had supplied a tugboat to help with the shipping in the dock. His name was Blue Nose, and he was the bossiest tug you could ever meet. "Hey, you there! Move these trucks and make way for my inspection." "You have no say in dockyard matters," said Warrington. "This area of the docks is under army control." "All docks are controlled by the Navy," replied Blue Nose, "so obey orders." "How dare you talk back to a high-ranking officer?" said Neville angrily. "Corporal Warrington's done more for this yard than you've ever done." "Less back-judging from you two, or I'll court-martial the both of you." "You can't court-martial them without permission from an army officer, and that's me." And the 3 engines went back to work. Hey, you there! I order you to stop. I want to get them in the Navy. Then I can teach them some respect." Warrington just sighed. I hope the Americans stay neutral. Last thing we need is more like him around here. That night, a battleship arrived at the dock. It had just come from the front lines and was collecting fresh supplies to take back. The 3 engines were shunting the awaiting trucks into place, being very careful. Blue Nose always took this part of the job very seriously. No sparks or engines near the loads while they were being loaded. Warrington believed that this may be because of a past event that happened to Blue Nose. "One truck left, the fuel tanker," said Neville. "Right, stand clear. As soon as all the supplies are on board, then you'll be safe to move. Obey orders." "You make it sound like we want to be blown up." Hank was cut off as a familiar sound filled the air. "The air raid siren!" shouted Corporal Warrington. "Jerry's trying to catch us out again." "All right, don't panic," ordered Blue Nose. "He's right. We all know what to do. Action stations, men." Quickly, the steam engines helped evacuate the yard, while the battleship and Blue Nose prepared the naval guns. Suddenly, the skies was filled with the enemy planes and bombers. Back in the shed, Sergeant Warrington and Hank stopped their story. "You can't stop there," Gordon cried out. "Ah, don't worry, Private Gordon," said Warrington. "I'll tell you the rest. But that'll have to wait until next time."